It was one of the best things that ever happened to me, just being in the military.
The Americans' high-speed offensive in the Pacific engulfs the important island of Guam, first American territory captured by the Japanese. Liberation is coming.
It wasn't just one attack force. My force was going into Guam. And it was a simple kind of attack. Battleships lay offshore, bombing, these huge guns and blast and blast.
Planes join in to round off 17 days of terrific bombardment.
The aircraft carriers were sending planes in. Then we came in. And of course, these were prime targets for the Japanese if they could hit them. So you were carrying 1,000 troops in each one of them. If they could put a shell in one, boom.
Shock troops with mechanized equipment.
So we were ready to go the next day. And my humor on praying was that I really was kind of disgusted with the people who were my crew in my division. In Pearl Harbor and everywhere I'd been, they drank and whored and talked nasty. They were just a foul bunch. I was very hot, so I'd taken a hammock and looked it on the underside of the bridge and a catwalk, where it was just a tiny bit cooler and I was looking out at the moon. I had my last talk with God. Back in the fantail, these bunch of idiots were singing, "Oh Lord, save me!" And I said, "No, leave it. They're lying." I said, "Lord, they lie, they cheat, they're drunks. I don't want to have any. If I die tomorrow, the one thing you please do not send me to the same place they go." That was my last prayer.
In one of the most spectacular war scenes yet filmed, the first assault wave goes in under vicious fire from the enemy.
I came from a very, very complicated and somewhat evil family with an alcoholic stepfather and the like, and a mother who was, in her youth, a trollop, who had children by various husbands over time. And it was no great displeasure for a war to come along when I was 13 when the war started in 41. But I'd been in, my mother had me in police detention because I refused to live with her. Gave in at one point and then ran away after that to be with my father, and that was worse. The war came at a very good time. I was big. I was 6 feet tall, at least I think by that time, and all my school friends were older than me, and I played cornfield football with them. And so when the war came and we discussed what we might do, we realized we're too young. They were all 16 years old. 17 you could go in the military. Then we found out that the Washington State Guard was recruiting. And it took me years and years and years before I discovered that my grandfather had been Washington State Guard in the invasion of the Philippines. It sounded great. We enlisted in the State Guards, and you drilled with full military equipment, and they had Enfield rifles that came out of World War I, shotguns, pistols a little bit, but mostly it was rifles. And you drilled and you marched and whatnot, and it was very, very worthwhile. So Jack and I volunteered to go on active duty with the State Guards up in the Olympic Peninsula. And there we were going to be looking for Japanese aircraft. They might come in off of a submarine. And it was boring, beautiful, beautiful countries. One part of the time I was in the forest where the trees were 200 feet tall. One of the places we were stationed was on the Straits of Juan de Fuca, looking out directly right on the beach. It's where you learned, an alcoholic doctor, how to spear salmon. But it was boring enough that I was not getting into the war. So by that time I'd figured out how to manage to get in. So I said, I'm leaving, and I got up and I, in my uniform, got a bus, went back home, called the military headquarters. They picked me up, thinking I was a deserter, took me out to Fort Roberts, and they gave me a minority discharge because I was 14 years old. So I was very honorably discharged at that point. If you saw my enlistment papers, 5 days later I was in the U.S. Navy. I got back home and I took a bus over to Seattle, knowing what I knew, my gifts and brilliance as a young man. I went up to the county courthouse and said, I want my birth certificate. And it costed $1. So I became Thomas Jack Meers, born July 2nd, 1925. So he was only just 17. He couldn't get into the regular enlistment, but he could enlist as a regular until your 21st birthday. So I enlisted in the regular Navy in his name. First days in boot camp, we were in like 42, 396 or whatever it was. That's a number. Each section had a new number. The next day, someone came in. Hey, did you hear who? Henry Fonda. Yeah. Everybody, he was quite famous already by that time.
You hear, Roberts? Get up here now!
You want to see me, Captain?
You did it! Don't stand there and lie to me. Confess it!
And how you really learned about it was because he'd gotten up in the morning and was in cleaning the toilets. So that was very impressive to everybody, that someone didn't just go into the military as an entertainer. Most of the actors did. They decided I was going to be a torpedoman, so I had to go to torpedo school. And I said, no. I just got out of school. I got into the war, the army, here, to fight the Japs. I will not. So they sent me to school at the Fleet Destroyer Base in San Diego. One or two of the other inmates there, we were very unhappy about this, decided we would rebel. We had read enough about World War I screw-ups that if you screwed up, they sent you into the battle. It's good, that's what we wanted to do. So we refused to obey orders, and we expected then they're going to send us off into battle. They sent us off to cleaning spittoons, cleaning toilets, and sweeping decks. Have you ever seen a pier in which 3 or 4 aircraft carriers are landing? Those are the longest decks in the world to sweep, docks to sweep. So that's where I learned my first introduction to naval humility.
I don't know which I hate worse, you or that other malignant growth that stands outside your door. How did you ever get command of a ship?
I hate your guts, you smart college guys.
As I looked around at men who had some authority, they were called, in the enlisted people, they were bosun's mates. They had the right equipment on their arms, and they were master at arms, and they were tattooed.
If they couldn't go to the pictures, they produced their own. On the front, the back, and the spur of the moment.
So one of the first things I knew I had to do is to establish and I was not 14. I guess by that time I might have even been 15. So my tattoos began at that point as a statement of adulthood. And it was kind of silly. And today, some of the tattoos today I kind of like. But in those days, they were simply in a statement about, I am older, I am not a young. And when I finally got off the sweeping decks and whatnot, they put me, or I could volunteer for different places. I think the first one that I got was the fire department.
Ships underway are in constant danger of a sudden fire, which can quickly spread to place the ship and its crew in the gravest danger.
And if anything is more boring than looking for Japanese balloons that never showed up, it's sitting in the fire department of the destroyer base waiting for a fire that never happened. So the fire department would sit and play cards all day long and talk and bullshit. In fact, that's the last time I played poker, when I lost on a full house. I was in the harbor patrol. I had my first boat all of my own. It's about 30 feet long. Had an engineer who took care of the motor, and a boat hook, a guy who had the ropes to the front of it. And I ran this up and down the channel where the ships came into San Diego, but it didn't get any closer to Japan.
General quarters, man your battle station.
And the next step was, well then, the brig. The brig is a Navy prison. I said, well, man, get me a little bit closer, a little more authority to that. So I got an opening there, and I went to work in the Navy brig, and we had prisoners there. The real tough part of the prison was the Marine Corps next door. They were nasty, nasty. They had people up cleaning the shower floors with toothbrushes in the middle of the night. Well, after a little while, this got dull and boring, and one of my buddies there, we decided that the Navy wouldn't dare court-martial us because we were, at that time, petty officers, and we were police, And we were masters at arms, and they would be shamed. They wouldn't want anybody to know that we had refused to obey orders, so we did. And we were quite right. They shipped us out. Now, what we expected, of course, was an aircraft carrier, or a battleship, or a cruiser. They gave us an APA, an attack transport. And I got training at Treasure Island. Most fun there was learning how to fight fire. So they'd go into a ship and flames burning everywhere, and you quite exciting. Anybody who told you that the military was not exciting didn't nearly enjoy it as much as I did. I thought it was great stuff. Got along fine, except my division officer said one afternoon he wanted me to be his messenger. And I was affronted. I said, I'm a petty officer. Petty officers aren't messengers. I was a policeman. He said, I want you for a messenger. And I said, I'll get you a seaman to be your petty officer. Next day I got transferred. And they sent me north with a small group to Portland, Oregon, where the Commencement Bay, the USS Alpine was being constructed. And that was an adventure. There wasn't an able-bodied man anywhere in the city. They're all in the military except us at the naval base. So if you walk through town, girls followed you. The phone rang continuously of, this is Joan, have you seen? Went on, so to say. Quite a vacation. I had enough training here in San Francisco to know a good deal more about how to splice cable, and how these huge, big booms that would carry a 30-ton tank.
They can also unload vehicles from landing craft along.
That was exciting. When the first time when you go to sea, these things swing back and forth, and they have to be anchored up vertically. So someone has to go up the top. So they put a rope through a pulley. You sit in a chair, a bosun's chair, and the ship's underway. And so as you're taking you up, you're swinging like this as you go up and up and up. And when the boom comes in, you have a pin that has to be just right to secure it in place. Otherwise, this huge, massive thing, if it fell down, it would bust right through the decks. So going into Pearl the first time was just absolutely stunningly beautiful. As you came in, the water started to change colors, and just lines of colors as you came in. And you looked, and Pearl didn't look like any disaster at all.
Japan launches a daring strike. Planes from a massive armada surprised the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor.
It was the winter of '43, and as we left Pearl, they had to put a fleet together. When they went to attack someplace this late in the war, we had absolute dominance of the Japanese because we'd knocked out their fleet at Midway. So the Japs had retreated, and from the south, MacArthur was bringing an air force in from Australia and the islands, so the Japs were retreating from both directions. But it was pretty dangerous. You take a fleet of 100 ships or so out, and there are battleships and cruisers and destroyers and landing craft. So it's a long sail out there, and they had to gather the fleet together first, and the carriers were on the outside with putting constant air cover on it. They were being protected by battleships if they were ever attacked by a fleet. Etowitok is an enormous atoll where the ships lined up in two parallel lines, and there's hundreds of ships. It's a big, big, big place. This is where you'd have a party for the enlisted men going into battle.
Somewhere in the Pacific, an American carrier drops anchor.
Now, they turned off the toilets, the heads on the inside of each ship, and let them go swimming. But since the first ship was a mile up the way, the cross currents, if you went swimming, you're liable to end up with somebody's BM in your mouth. On the island, there wasn't a tree on any of these islands we went by. They're all been blasted away. The battleships, they lay offshore and 20 miles out or 10 miles out and just blast away, and the planes would come in, nothing standing. The Japanese would be down below waiting until they come up when you came in. And Kwajalein was one of these that we went in for a beer party. And this is the one where they'd joke about their beer. P-38 was a twin-tailed fighter plane, and the only kind of beer they'd allow on for enlisted men was 2%. So if you had drank 2% beer, you'd P-38.
Another of the great decisive battles of world history has been joined.
In Normandy, it was bad because they got the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Guam wasn't quite the same. The Japanese were always there. They always fought. They always dug in. They were very, very tough soldiers. So the GIs always had trouble. We never did. The hospital ships filled up pretty fast, so they started sending us some of their wounded. And about that time, we'd unloaded, and we were now taking on wounded, and we turned around and headed back for Pearl. I absolutely hated my senior bosun's mate. He was a nasty bastard. And I wanted off that ship pretty bad, and a box of cigars helped me get an approval for a transfer. So in Pearl, they gave me a choice between either a submarine in Pearl or an aircraft carrier in the States. So the first time I said, well, submarines look pretty exciting. So I went down to the sub base to take a look over. And they had that kind of freedom to do things like that. I stepped on board my first sub and almost took the top of my head off. They were built for people under 6 feet tall. And all you had to do was just stand up straight. And the second one, besides that, was the smell. You know what farts smell like when there are 150 men, don't have any air conditioning, and the smell of diesel oil farts. I said, I didn't know at that time. You get used to it mighty fast. But I said, no. So I walked off that sub and said, I'll take an aircraft carrier, even if I have to go back to the States for it. Every morning at dawn, before dawn, you had general quarters. Bang, 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 bang. And an alarm go off and you run for your guns. My gun on the Alpine was a single 20 millimeter at first. I was graduated to a double later on. You'd run up the gangways, on up top deck, and you're strapped into your gun. As the sun starts to come up. And it really was quite exciting. Here's the sun, you're ready to shoot it. You're really looking for a submarine, because at night the subs can't see well, but at dawn they can get their periscope up. Before you can see it, they can get a torpedo out. So in terms of anticipation, we'd have practice, gunnery practice. You learn to fire the gun. I'm then focusing, following, trying to lead the target. So I'm firing. These are 20 millimeter slugs are about this long, about this big around. So every morning you're going up to the gun. This gun you become quite familiar with, maybe almost intimate with. It's kind of your friend. You fire it whenever they have a chance. So it's nothing new about firing the gun. You're really waiting. So when you're getting close to combat, you're waiting for the Japanese. You're there for a reason. You're there to fight the Japanese. And these bloody aircraft carriers knock them out. You can see them at a distance when they're attacking aircraft carriers and things like this, but they never got close to us, close enough to shoot. So all my training with the 20 millimeter was just wasted. And even when, after the invasion, I'm still sitting with my lonely gun. The Virgin, poor little thing. This is the first of a new variety of aircraft carrier. It was the newest and the best. And I said, oh, that's great, I've got a ship. Now we're going to go to war. And they gave the bad news. And since it's new, it's going to be a training ship. I said, oh, come on, Jesus. Twice, I risked court-martials to get going, and now they put me on a training ship. Well, I was a good boy, and I got promoted on that one, and my commanding division officer liked me. In fact, somewhere along the line, he asked if he could put me up for going to officers' training school. I was a little bit embarrassed to tell him, but you see, sir, I'm not Thomas Jack Mears. He said, then who are you? And so I had to tell him I didn't even finish high school. But I did do very well on that ship, and I was second in charge of a division, in charge of the small boats. But I wanted out. And I almost, almost suicidal in a sense, because we had a training cruise up on the Straits of Fuca, and we were anchored offshore of Port Townsend, I think it was. And since I'm in charge of the boats, I'm the one who teaches them how to do it. I told the junior officer of the deck on the gangway I was going to supervise them that night. And he said, "What?" I said, "No, I'm in charge of these. I need to go out and supervise and make sure they were." So I went in shore and got drunk. And by the time I got back aboard, smiling and whatnot, thinking they're going to throw me off the ship and I get to go, he put me under arrest and said, next morning I was told I was on report and I was going to be court-martialed, and I was. And my defense was that my mother was ill. I had been on the phone to my poor sick mother. And would they really prosecute a poor sailor who went on and on talking with his mother? I would be on probation for a year, and if I did anything like twist my ankle or anything, they'd break me down. The funny part about it was, these sorts of things go to Washington, D.C. The Bureau of the Navy reviewed my court-martial, and they said, "Oh, the punishment's too severe. This poor boy was going to have to call his mother." So they took away they didn't take away the court-martial, they took away the probation. But what did happen from there on out, they were more prepared to let me go. And that's when I got my hero ship. And I said, now I got a chance. It was in for repairs when I got moved off of my small carrier. But sitting next to it, surprising to me, was the USS Alpine, my old former ship. And I said, if I'd been on it, I could have. It had hit by 2 kamikazes, and I missed it. I said, how could they do this to me? They had the ship fully repaired, radar in the works, and everything modern and new. All the new aircraft that existed, and we were headed for Tokyo. And I said, yeah, we go. So we went out from Puget Sound up to the Straits of Fuca, and we stopped. I said, what are you stopping for? You don't know of a degaussing range? The hulls of ships are magnetic. The degaussing range has cables underwater, and the ship sails into this area, and they raise these cables up around the hull of the ship, and they pass an enormous amounts of electricity through it, and it degausses. It changes the electrical charge on the hull of the ship. It's a kind of a protective device. We're sitting there while the war goes on, and I'm anxious for it, and we just sat. And we sat, and there's some broadcasts. And I was really getting more than irked. We're supposed to be halfway to Tokyo by now. And they announced some kind of peculiar place in Japan called, was it Nagasaki? Hiroshima? I said, come on. And they stopped the goddamn war. And I was so pissed. I spent a whole war trying to get there, and then, of course, I didn't realize what had happened there, but at the time, I certainly thought there was a nasty trick to play on me. So the end of my heroism had efforts to do something.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
They turned us around and headed us for San Francisco. We come down here, they discovered that this ship could not go through the Panama Canal because the gun spawn, since the bubbles outside it, the big 40-millimeter cannons were on, were so wide they wouldn't fit. So they took acetylene torches and trimmed her fat off the side. It was disgusting. This beautiful ship they were cutting to be putting in a corset. And they turned us around out to Hawaii. And we picked up the fleet there. And we also picked up wounded. So we brought wounded on board to bring back to the States. And the admiral of the fleet came on board. And we took a 100, 200, 500 ship fleet from the South Pacific to Panama, through the canal. The president was waiting for us. We came up the East Coast, past Cuba, and as we came in the harbor at New York, the president flew in and landed on board. The ships in New York came out to greet us with horns blowing, water whistling all over. They took us right downtown New York. And to make sure the citizens and girls knew who the heroes were, we were white. So everybody knows that, that we're suntanned. And they opened up every ship. It wasn't just us. Battleships, cruisers, the ships that were terribly deep, anchored right or moored in the docks all along New York front. And they had open house. They opened the ships up to the citizens of the city. And we had the biggest whorehouse on board my ship you've ever seen.
As serviceman and civilian threw dignity aside, this was the time to whoop it up.
The fun part of the Navy was GIs and military people, the Army people, could gamble if they wanted. It was legal for them. But Navy people couldn't gamble on their ships. So since the Navy people couldn't gamble, they decided to make some money off the Army. The ship's carpenters and crew members made gambling tables, roulette tables, and they had lights on 24 hours a day in the heads, in the johns. And these GIs were gambling 24/7. And whoever ran the table took a percentage of the pot.
Torpedoes for the Navy. Complicated mechanism that must be accurate.
The torpedo men learned to take gallon jugs or gallon cans of pineapple juice, open them, put them behind and let them ferment. And they made brandy. So they also had a supply of liquor that they could sell to the Army. When we reached, if it was New York or Boston, the ship next to us was the Wasp. They knew by that time that two ships were on the rocks down in the Azores, off the shores of Portugal. One was a ship with wax on it, Army ladies. The other one was black GIs, combat GIs. And that sounded like fun. This was a time just after Truman had integrated the military. So blacks were now able to do things they hadn't been before. But we were going to take on board 500, 1,000, what it was, black combat GIs, and they were tough sons of bitches. And they didn't want anybody condescending to them. But we're also bringing on like 400 Army nurses. So with about 500, 600, 800 sailors on board, 1,000 black GIs, and 400 WACs, and I was in the police force, I said, that should be an exciting time. Well, we were a little bit concerned about the racial and male-femaleness of this. So the first night out, as a treat for our passengers, after dinner on the hangar deck, they set up for movies. And they moved all the kitchen stuff out of the way and put up benches, and they reserved the benches for the WACs. The WACs hadn't been in dress for quite some while, so they put on their rayon hose, but they needed something to keep the garters up. So they take 2 condoms, stretch them out, tie them together, and 2 of them for each leg, for a garter on each leg. So they were not unfamiliar at all with condoms. And the WACs came, as they say, marching down. The torpedo men had been of help in their humor, and they took helium or hydrogen from their supplies for the torpedoes and filled condoms with them. So as the WACs came down, the GIs were releasing these balloons of 100 condoms floating up. The officer in charge was infuriated that they should torture these poor helpless WACs, not knowing that each one of them had 2 condoms on each leg already. We and the police knew that it wasn't all over, and we knew these girls were pretty forward. And we could hear noises up there, but they had a guard at each one of the staircases. No one was going to go up there when we had guards on those 24/7. But we could hear noises. So me as a policeman with a flashlight and one of my buddies, we got up to the flight deck, looking around trying to find out where this noise comes. Men's voices. These portholes are about 30, 40, this is in the middle of Atlantic. The temperature of the ocean, you'd die in probably 5 to 10 minutes if you fell into the ocean. So how are these men getting into there? And you're looking down, shining a light down here like this. Here's their porthole down here. And we're on a catwalk up here by the gun sponson. When you were firing a 40-millimeter cannon at any one time, you're basically firing 4 barrels almost simultaneously. And since the brass was very expensive, they didn't want to throw it away even in war. So they welded steel nets down below the gun sponsons. In time of battle, he just threw the brass down there. Well, these crazy soldiers were going up the gun sponsons, physically dropping down into the nets. The WACs were tying blankets together, swinging around so that the guy could get it. And he could hold on to this, and they swing him out over, the ship's going, and here's somebody swinging on the end of a blanket. And they were having a party. WACs started coming up. It was very cold up, so they brought blankets with them. And they sat down in their blankets, and then pretty soon they were joined by somebody they liked. And pretty soon, the junior off the deck with his glasses, looking from the bridge down, look at these strange blankets wiggling around in different ways. And he concluded that they weren't doing hanky-panky or something down there. And he was furious on board a ship of war, well, a former ship of war. So not only did we have gambling on board the ship, we had outright fornication on the flight deck. And I had a Sergeant Daffy was someone who I liked. She was a good-looking whack that I got to know. I wanted to get out, and I couldn't get out on points. Anybody who was in the regular military, depending on how many months you'd been in, if you're in combat zone or whatever it was, you acquired a certain point schedule. And as soon as you had enough, it discharged you and let you go home. And the poor ship that lost most of its people, they didn't want to let anybody go. And as the process, I got my name changed by then. I had to get certificate. That's when I found out I was wanted by the FBI too. Why? So when I was in the Guards, I also registered for the draft. I was 14 then. They called my draft number while I was in the Navy. And I didn't appear. So Dale Richard Mears is reported as a draft dodger. So when I changed my name came up in a different context, and I needed clearance from the FBI as well. But by that time, by time New York, I'd gotten my clearance for that. And I found out more than that since my enlistment in my brother's name was till he was 21, and I'm 18 months younger than him, they wanted to keep me in another 18 months. And I said, oh, no, 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 no. So I picked up a case of scabies. It's a tiny insect that burrows into your skin, and it itches like holy hell. Well, I picked up a case of scabies, and I refused to let them cure me.
Why? Because they had to take you in.
And they transferred me off the ship to the Naval Hospital in Brooklyn. So these crazy bastards wanted to keep me on for another 18 months, and I wanted to go home. So box of cigars, roses, and what candy, and I got my transfer from there to Seattle. But I knew I was a very ignorant person, and I knew full well that I never wanted to be in the military ever again. So as soon as I could, I went back to high school, and I spent 9 months taking geometry, algebra, German, history. I took 5-6 courses per term, and passed with the highest grades in the city of Tacoma. Then went to the University of Washington, and I went through undergraduate school in 3 years instead of 4. For all my best intentions, I wanted to fight. I wanted to do battle, and the irony was that as much as I wanted to and other people didn't, a lot of them had to go, and I couldn't. I couldn't get through as hard as I tried. Afterwards, even much later, I look back and say, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Not going?
No, just being in the military. It taught me more about respect, dignity, love. No, not love. I think didn't fall in love until she was born. And about caring. So the military was a very good thing for me, and it certainly taught me that what I wanted to do is I wanted to be an educated person. And that's a pretty good lesson. I think we got our tanks out at Pearl Harbor. So our supplies probably came on board here. So from here, this is where we got ready. We got the ship ready to go. And we got a fleet, we've joined a fleet. Now the fleet's out here somewhere. And we came into, where is Hawaii?
Oh, Hawaii.
Oh, not Pearl. Honolulu.
All of these islands are Hawaii.